How can you check which rows in one table are not contained in a second table? Hello, I'm Philip Burton of idodata.com. So here you can see we've got two tables, first table and second table. Now you can see which rows in the first table do not exist in the second table. It's rows 1 and 2. So what I want is the output from rows 1 and 2 as a data set. Now, if you're going to do this as a practice activity, I would like you to do it 3 different ways. And I also want you to have a look at whether adding nulls into the ID column affects your answer in any way. Good luck. Right, so let's have a look at some of the ways that we can do this. So we've got an ID and a description. I could just look at the ID column and say, okay, if the ID exists in one table and in the other table, then I want to exclude this. So I can use a where clause for this. So where the ID in the first table, not in 3, 4, and 5. So if I were to run that, then you can see that just gives me 1 and 2. Now, not in. In says, okay, give me the IDs from the first table, and if it's not part of these, then show it. Now, be careful, do not write is not in. That sounds like it's better English. It doesn't make sense in SQL. Now, I want 3, 4, 5 to be a dynamic list. So how can I get that list from SecondTable? I can put another query there. So I can say select ID from SecondTable. And I can run that separately. So there's my list of 3, 4, 5. So now I say where in the first table my ID not in 3, 4, 5. So that is one way of doing it. Another way is by using a join. So I want everything from first table and I want to compare it with second table, but I don't necessarily want everything from second table. What sort of join is that if I want everything from first table? That is an outer join and possibly a left outer join. So let's construct that. So select, I'm just going to put star for now, just so I can get onto the from. Select everything from first table. Now, when doing joins, I usually use an alias. So as F for first table, and then I'm going to use a left join. So a left join, and I'm aliasing this as well. Now, if you are wondering, okay, what's the difference between a left join and an inner join and that sort of thing, then have a look at the link to the video that you might see at the top of your screen. That'll explain the different types of joins. Now, with a normal join, as opposed to a cross join, you need an on. You need what you're comparing with. So what are we comparing in the first table and the second table? We're comparing ID, where the ID is the same. So where f.id is equal to s.id. So let's run this as far as we've got and see what happens. So you can see now we have got 3 rows. So that's all of the rows from first table. And we've got all of those in second table where they match. Where they don't match, they give us a null. But we only want those where they don't match. So therefore, we need the null as part of the where condition. So what do I write? Where. Now, what's next? It's not just ID. We've got 2 ID columns, f.id and s.id. We want s.id being null. So s.id, and do I just say equals null? Never. Never use equals for null unless you are setting something to null. If you want to test for it, you say is null. So let's have a look, and that gives us rows 1 and 2. So that's all we want, except we don't want these extra columns anymore. So I'm going to change this star to f.star. So that just gives me the first table. So what else can I do? Well, if I have got these 2 tables, so select star from first table and select star from second table, I can see which rows are in the first table but not in the second table by putting the word except between them. So give me all of the rows from first table except where those rows happen to appear in the second table. So if I run that, again, we get our answer. Now notice that this looks at both the ID and the description. In our previous ones, we were just looking at ID similarities. But here, this takes the entirety of the row. So if I change this from free C to free F, so that's not the same as a row in the second table. And so if I recreate these tables and then run this except, then it's going to give me this as an additional answer because the entirety of the row is not the same. Right, so I'll just change that back. And now the entirety of that third row is the same, so it's not going to return that. So we've got three different ways of doing this. We've got a where not in, we've got a left join, and we've got an except. So let's just go back to our first example. So it's giving me 3, 4, 5 here, and I've got IDs 1 and 2 remaining. What if I was to add an additional thing, an additional row here, and it's going to have an ID of null, and we're going to have our F description there. So will that make any difference to this first answer? So we're asking, are these IDs in this? So superficially, you would say, no, that's not going to make any difference. We're still going to return 1 and 2. The answer might surprise you, however. It's not giving me any of the rows, not even rows 1 and 2. Why is that? Well, null is the unknown. Null is I don't know. So is 3 in a list of 3, 4, 5 null? Well, obviously it is. Is 2 equal to 3? No. Is 2 equal to 4? No. Is 2 equal to 5? No. Is 2 equal to null? I don't know. It's an unknown thing. So 2 might be equal to null if that particular row turns out to be 2. So I cannot answer the question. And therefore, I cannot say it is not in that list. So that's why it returns none of them. Now, it sounds a bit bizarre, and it is. This is what Microsoft says. Using null values in an in or not in can produce unexpected results. And I think you'll agree that that was fairly unexpected. So what can we do? Well, we'll have to modify this. We have to get rid of the null. So I can say where ID is not null. So that now gives me a reduced list. It no longer gives me 3, 4, 5 null. It gives me 3, 4, 5. Because there's no longer a null there, well, it's no longer going to wreck our select statement. Now the question is, what happens if you then put another null in here? What is our comparison going to be? And it's starting to get a bit complicated now. So is null equal to null? And the answer is the unknown equal to the unknown? I don't know. But similarly, I don't know if the unknown is equal to 3 or 4 or 5. So it starts getting really difficult. And so this is when you might want to say where the ID is null or is not null, and actually include or exclude it specifically. Or you might then want to test that against the description. So where the ID is null and the description is not in, and give me all of the descriptions from SecondTable where ID is null. So that says, okay, we have got a description of F. Is F the same as G? And in this case, no, it isn't. So, oh, just missing a bracket at the end. So therefore, give me that. If I change this to an F again, so these two rows are identical, then you can see it gets dropped. Now, it gets a bit more complicated when you're looking at things like this. So it's probably easier to just get rid of the nulls avoid this second line and only include this when actually testing for nulls in your first table is really important. So this is as far as you probably need to go if you've got the possibility of nulls in your second table. Now let's go down to our second example, the left join. What's going to happen here, do you think, with these two nulls? And does this surprise you? We have a null in the answer. So let's just have a look at this again, not including this where condition. So I've got the entirety of the first table, and I also include the second table where it matches. So now I want to exclude everything where it does match. So where this s.id column is not null. So that gets rid of that row, leaving these three other rows, because I'm not testing for whether f.id is null. I'm just testing as to whether s.id is null. And then finally, we've got this except. So this except is looking at the entirety of the two tables. So if I just comment out this except, then you can see we have got these tables. So is this row the same as this row? And the answer is no, those rows are not the same, and therefore this except will not exclude it. So here we've got three different ways of finding out if rows in the first table are there in the second table. And as you can see, if you're using the not in, it gets a bit more complicated if you start introducing nulls. So if you do that, you'll have to have a think about, okay, what answer do I want where the input data is null? Thank you for joining me in this video. If you like it, then please click the like button. And why not subscribe and click the bell next to it so you'll be notified of any new videos. Thank you for watching this and keep learning.